Yeah, so this program, just for those who are new, this program is part of our retirement boot camp initiative, and we have all kinds of programming throughout the month, including this beer tasting, which will continue through the summer, and then we'll go back to wine in the fall. We have field trips every other week. We went to the Ad Astra alpaca farm Tuesday and had a great time. And we have a dessert, a film and dessert in a movie is what we call it. It's kind of a film discussion group and all kinds of things going on. So if you want to know more, you can go to lplks.org/retirement and check out our calendar. So I hope you do that. I do want to say you will want to be in screen view when Jeff starts speaking, because that way you can see the presentation and it will fill up your screen. So go ahead and do that. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce Jeff Dieman. Jeff is the head brewer at Free State, and he's been with Free State since 2002. And he told me before we went live that he started as a busser in, what year was that, Jeff?
1989.
1989.
Okay,
yeah, so
the year that we opened, a couple of months after Free State opened, I took a summer job as a busser at Free State, and then was here for, I think, 6 to 8 months before I moved on to a different thing. But so I was 16 years old and the youngest employee at the time.
Wow. In the days when they had the old back patio and
Yeah.
early days. Yeah, that was fun. So how did you get interested in brewing in the first place?
Well, actually, we were talking a little bit earlier in the lobby. Some folks, Don and Diane Lowe, that are in the lobby right now, their son, David Lowe, was a friend that I became friends with him one summer when I was spending time out in Berkeley, California. I had taken a semester off from school here at KU, and I had been at a dude ranch working that summer before, saved up enough money to go to Berkeley and take a semester off and see friends. Had several friends out there, and Dave was somebody that I knew peripherally from high school. He's a year younger than us, but I wasn't friends, but we quickly became really good friends. He was really interested in food, really interested in beer, and I was interested in those things as well. And he had started homebrewing, and so I started homebrewing out there with him. And then when I returned after that semester away, Lawrence Homebrewing Company, or Homebrew Supply, had opened up, and it seemed like a natural fit to transition into that. And I just went gangbusters. Really enjoyed it. Did it throughout that summer, and then I graduated in '95 from University of Kansas with a degree in art history, and I had choices. I could either go to grad school, or I could go on an adventure and move to Seattle. And when I moved to Seattle, I was either going to go in one of two directions. I was going to try and make my way in photography, or I was going to become a brewer. And I knocked on a lot of doors and quickly realized that brewing was something I was passionate about. So I worked at several breweries throughout my time in Seattle, which was from 1995 until 2002. And then, but the vast majority of that was with Pike Brewing Company, which is right off of the Pike Place Market. It was a great experience, worked with some world-class brewers, and then moved back here in 2002 and was hired as one of the brewers at Free State. So I've been with Free State ever since, and now the head brewer. So it's pretty cool. It's great.
Yeah, it is cool. And it's good to know that about you. I mean, I just wanted people to get to know you a little bit before you did your thing. Sure. But I know you've got a presentation all prepared, so I'm just going to let you share your screen and get to it.
Yeah, so bear with me if this share screen experience goes awry. I think we'll be okay, but I am not always the best technically here. Can everybody see that?
We can.
All right, so this is kind of where I come and go between the two breweries on a daily basis. This is the ramp to our production facility, and I can't take any credit for the flowers out there, but you know, Brad Scott is our production manager and attends to those on a daily basis. But we entered this space in 2008, and close to the first firing of the kettle, we had a fire, and that set us back about 6 to 8 months before we could actually get to brewing in this space. But then in 2009, we started brewing beyond the four walls of the original brewery, and we're brewing here as well. Originally just for draft, but then eventually in bottle as well. And we're now on our second bottling line. So the first bottling line we decommissioned, sold, and bought a quote new one. We've always been keen on recycling here at Free State. So we buy a lot of used equipment, perfectly well suited for the for what it was intended for, still working, but we're the secondary owners of said equipment. If we were to start a tour at the production facility, we would start in this room, and here's kind of your backs would be turned to these malt bags. So all this malt that you see that's in bags arrived at the facility today. So I offloaded 42,000 pounds of malt into this area of the warehouse, which kind of acts as, you know, a set of lungs for us. We have a lot of things coming in and going out there. Eventually, all this malt will make its way up onto the shelves and get put away. Obviously, we rotate stock, and you know, we make sure that the facility is clean. We're over, you know, beer is a food product, and we have oversight from the FDA, the Department of Agriculture, et cetera. So we need to make sure that the facility is clean and free of pests, and so we pay special attention to cleaning. Actually, I would say that that brewers are as much a janitor as anything. So we're constantly cleaning and sweeping and washing things. So this area that we would have gathered in is, let's go back to that first picture. It's a little wider picture. This is where all the malt handling takes place. And I'm not sure that everybody knows what malt is. Malt is, generally speaking, barley that the maltster has hydrated and germinated and allowed to grow just a little bit. There's an endosperm in the barley seed that grows, and during that growth, there's a little rootlet that comes out, and the interior structure of that seed is modified. And so the maltster is trying to fully modify the seed into something that we as brewers then further modify and create food for yeast. So it's essentially breaking down really tight protein and sugar structures into more manageable structures that we can break down into even finer sugars through the processes of brewing. So let's see here. So in addition to the bag malt, we also receive what's called base malt. And we get that shipped in by the truckload that is then pneumatically conveyed into one of our 2 silos. These 2 silos are a little bit different in size. Actually, the taller one holds a lot less malt. And it was originally at Boulevard Brewing Company. We used to use it for a specialty malt, and I'll get into that in a little bit as to what specialty malts are. And I just realized that you guys haven't opened a beer yet. So I probably need to talk a little bit about the first beer that we're going to be drinking. So I'm drinking the Free State Lager. Free State Lager, I like to call it a tavern lager. It kind of has some elements of, an American style Pilsner, some elements of a German Helles beer, which is a pale lager. And it's, it's all our own. So it uses some German Pilsner malt, some American 2-row malt, some German Sapphire hops, and some American Comet hops. So it's kind of a blending of New World and Old World. But I would also say, for people that think of beer as, your Budweisers, your Coors, your macro brews, this is probably the closest thing in flavor to that style of beer. I would say it's the most beer-like beverage that we create. And I do that in quotes because, yeah, it's all beer, but this is probably what most people are familiar with. Pilsner is the #1 style of beer in the world. And this is kind of a variation of that style. I find it to be slightly bready, a little bit citrusy in the finish, and definitely clean and refreshing. It's got a little bit of a carbonic bite. There's they say there's 4 main ingredients in beer. There's malt, hops, which we'll talk about in a little bit, yeast, and water. And so we get our water from the Lawrence Municipal Supply. It's great brewing water, except for the chlorine and the chloramines that are in the water supply. So we have to filter that out. So we have essentially a large Brita type charcoal filter that filters out all those chloramines. Those are the 4 main ingredients. One ingredient that gets kind of overlooked, or there's a couple of other ingredients that get overlooked. Carbonic acid is kind of an ingredient. A lot of brewers will touch up, we try and get as much natural carbonation in the beer as possible. And we do pretty good at that, but then we also have to touch it up with forced carbonation. And that carbonic acid, it has a scrubbing effect. And it does lower the pH a little bit in the beer, and it gives, it helps the beer to leave your palate quickly and cleanly. So, but getting back to the silos, we get shipments in on a monthly basis, and because these originally this taller silo held specialty malt, now it holds 2-row as well. Well, so when this gets emptied and the main silo, the larger silo, gets emptied halfway, I can order in a truckload of malt. The truck that's delivering it will get weighed next door at the grain elevator, pump in a portion of malt into the smaller silo, go get weighed again, and then pump in the rest to the larger silo. And then we will empty the large silo. And once that gets emptied, we can just directly fill that tank entirely from the tanker. And so we have this cadence back and forth where we never run out of two-row, which is the number one malt in our portfolio. So the vast majority of any given recipe is going to be made up of two-row. And each individual recipe will also have specialty malts. So I don't know if you can see this, but so, you can see this is largely the two-row component. And then, for instance, this isn't an actual recipe, but there's a little bit of crystal malt on top of this two-row. And that lends some sweetness and some caramel type character. We'll talk a little bit about that in talking about Ad Astra. And then there's some chocolate wheat on top. It's wheat that has been roasted to a certain color, and that takes on chocolatey notes. Those specialty malts, well, everything actually gets milled in this mill. So there's an auger that you can see kind of going in from the bottom of the silos into the side of the building. There's piping that you can see that goes into the side of the building. That augers in the malt into this room that holds the mill. The green part of this is the mill itself, and that tan part on top is what weighs the malt. So there's a weigher dumper system there where it meters in a certain weight of malt and then augers it into the mill. So that's how we have computer programs that we punch in how much two-row we want to send into the mill. And then it'll stop feeding that malt into the mill once we've reached our target for that particular recipe. The red portion that you see there and the conduit that is attached to it, that is our conveyance system. And it is a chain that has small discs that extend all the way out to the side of that conduit. And in between the discs there's space that allows for that malt to be conveyed through that conduit. And it's essentially, it's a big loop so that it collects, it sends in specialty malt into the top of the weigher and the mill, and then it collects on the other side the milled malt, which is called grist, and that is then conveyed over to this container called a grist case. So we mill in typically the day before a brew. Takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on the brew. And then the first brewer will come in at about 4:45 in the morning, get started. He'll mash in probably around 5:30. And once he's completely emptied the grist case, he will mill in for the second brew, which will start, the second brewer will come in at around 9:30 or so. So this is our brew house over there. And it looks pretty complicated, doesn't it? It's a very hands-on brew house. There are a number of brew houses, Boulevard being one of them, that has a lot of automation built in. All the valves at Boulevard are controlled basically with a mouse. There's a control center where the brewer is sitting in front of a computer, and this is very hands-on. Every valve, every measurement is taken by hand. So this particular brew house was used as well. It was purchased from Widmer Brewing Company out of Portland, Oregon, and it was their brew house from the I think it's actually a 1988 commission on the warehouse, on the brew house. So pretty in line with what our brew house was downtown. And they sold it to us in 2007. So it lasted them a good long while, and now it's lasted us a good long while. And it's from the same manufacturer as the original brew house downtown. By and large, most of the brew house is intact from 1989. We have had to replace the bottom of the kettle once, and the vast majority of the kettle a second time, where we actually, if you've ever been to our brew house downtown, I sledgehammered out the brick, and we had some guys come in and cut out the old kettle and refabricate it, and then had Carl Ramberg come in and redo the brick, and so it looks just like the 1989 brew house. So getting back to the brewing process, the grist travels from the grist case across to the brew house via another auger, and then gets dropped down into what's called the steel smasher. And the steel smasher is where water is first introduced to the mash. So water of a certain temperature based on what the grist temperature is. So in the wintertime, we have grist that can be as cold as 32 degrees. So very cold malt that then has to be introduced with water of a certain temperature so that the end result rests at a certain temperature range that will allow enzymes present in the malt to convert all those starches that are in the malt into fermentable sugars. So in the summertime, obviously the grist is much warmer. So we are constantly recording the data of the grist temperature, and we will have to input hotter water on the days where the grist is cold, and cooler water when the grist is warm.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt just because this is relevant to our first question. Is the air conditioning that you don't have, is the AC detrimental to the process of beer making?
No.
It's just
no. Other than the fact that you guys would have to pay a lot more for your 6-pack.
Okay, all right. I wondered if it was just a cost-effective measure.
I'll get into refrigeration a little bit. I mean, we do want to take care of our yeast, and we want to take care of our fermentations. So we do have refrigeration. It's just not for the brewers.
Okay, carry on.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's fine. So this whole hydration process is called mash-in. And mash-in takes about half an hour. During that time, those enzymes are immediately starting to convert these long chain starches into sugars that the yeast can metabolize. So I like to say that, brewers are really more yeast farmers and janitors and cooks than they are brewers in certain ways. I mean, we are making food for yeast to make the beer. We just make the food. The yeast really makes the beer. So we'll talk a little bit about that when we get into the cellar. So from mash in, we do a short rest period where we just record the temperature and let the mash kind of settle in. What you're not seeing in this picture is that on the inside, and you can kind of see on top of the mash tun, this tall cylinder with a motor on its side. And that cylinder and motor are there to turn and raise rakes that are in the mash tun. So the mash gets hydrated, gets sent into the mash tun. Also, what you're not seeing in the mash tun is what's called a false bottom. So there are a set of really tight screens that rest, stainless steel screens that rest on, not on the very bottom, but kind of raised up just a hair from the bottom, and act as essentially a giant colander or strainer for the mash. And so liquid collects underneath those screens, and that liquid that's created when all the sugars are converted is called wort, W-O-R-T. And we use a lot of jargon in brewing. Wort's, one of those jargon words. The water that we use in brewing is called liquor, L-I, like the liquor store. But so we use hot liquor and cold liquor, both. So hot liquor and filtered city water were used to create the temperature of the mash. And the cold liquor will come into play later on. So those rakes are raised, they're in the bed, kind of cutting into the bed of the mash, just gently making sure that things are incorporated and that there are channels for the liquid to pass through. One thing I didn't mention when we mill is that the malt has, and let's see if I can pull up a picture here. So this is germinating malt that, oh, did that pop back out? Okay. Can you guys see the brew house, or?
We can see the brew house still, yeah.
Okay, you can't see the malt. Okay. Can you see the malt?
No.
We
We can see a pull down for the file, but we can't see the file itself.
Well, unfortunately, we might have to skip out on that. But so the malt has a husk to the outside of it, and when we mill, we want to gently crack open that grain. And there's two rollers in the mill that kind of come together with just a tiny little gap between them, and the malt is going into that gap and just gently being cracked open, largely leaving the husk intact. And we want that. We want that for a number of reasons, but the two largest reasons are that we don't want to pulverize it so that it becomes, the mash itself becomes more of a concrete, compacted mess, that those husks kind of lift up the mash and allow for channels of liquid to pass through the mash. And that's important to us. Also, those husks contain a lot of tannins, which those tannins, which if you've been listening to your wine purveyors, they're great in certain aspects of wine, but they do create this astringency that is not very pleasant in beer. So we try and avoid that. We've converted the starches into sugar. We're now ready to rinse out that wort If we were to just empty the mash tun of the liquid that's in there right now in the mash, we would not be able to fill the kettle. So we have to rinse the rest of the sugars that are in the kettle, are in the mash tun, and because there's lots of sugars left in the mash that wouldn't get conveyed over if we didn't rinse it. And that rinsing is called sparging. So we'll sparge and lauter or transfer the mash water over to the kettle for about an hour, closer to 2 hours on the production side. Downtown, it takes about an hour and a half. If it gets too much more than 2 hours, then the brewers are cussing. So because it's really, impacted their day. Once the kettle is full, we reach a boil, and this is when it's time to start adding hops. Hops are the spice in beer, and they contribute different characters at different times in the process. So the earlier that hops are introduced, the more bitterness that they impart on the beer. The later that they're added to the product, the more aroma and flavor they have an impact on. So hops come in lots of different flavors. We tend to veer towards ones that are, floral and citrusy and fruity. But there are ones out there that are piney or resinous, for all the hippies out there, reminiscent of cannabis. So, and it actually is a plant. It's a perennial vine growing plant that is closely related to cannabis. And the vast majority of the hops that we use come from the Pacific Northwest, particularly the Yakima Valley in Washington. Hence the name of Yakamaniac, the third beer that we'll drink.
Maybe we should drink the second one though, because that'd be great.
So the second beer that we're going to drink is Ad Astra Amber Ale. And this is the first beer that was ever brewed at Free State. And it's, Ad Astra, the name comes from our state motto, Ad Astra per Aspera, to the stars through adversity. And certainly there was some adversity in opening Free State. My boss, Chuck Magrill, lobbied the legislature to allow for brewing in the state of Kansas, which had not occurred since well before Prohibition. And he did so in the 1980s, keenly saw that there was an opportunity to attach something to the liquor by the drink bill that was going through the state house in '86, and worked with Went Winter and some other folks to get brewing on the books in the state of Kansas. And then he maxed out some credit cards and asked a lot of favors, and it was a labor of love and definitely a lot of work to get Free State open. And it's been a lot of work to keep it going too. So I mean, it's rewarding. So it's rewarding to have a beer like Ad Astra at the end of the day. This is an amber ale. It's got some of this chocolate wheat on it in a small quantity that you can smell in the aroma. You can also get a little bit of chocolatiness, some breadiness, and you get some caramel character. So the caramel malt that I talked about earlier is present in Ad Astra. This also features some German hops. While this isn't necessarily an alt style beer, it probably shares its greatest affiliation with the alts, which is a German ale. And it's excellent with food. It's probably my favorite food beer that we make, because it really takes on, it really works well with grilled meats and anything that has some sort of caramelization to it. The Maillard reactions that take place in the malts that were used here are kind of echoed in whatever food that you eat with it. So, cheers.
Cheers.
Back to brewing. So we've reached a boil, and now we're ready to incorporate hops. We boil for an hour and a half, and the reason we do so is to introduce hops, to pasteurize the wort. And this is important because there are other organisms on the malt that can create off flavors. Nothing in beer. There are no pathogens that can live in beer, so that's not a concern. The pHs in beer are just too low, and there's alcohol present, so no pathogens can live. But we want the beer to have the flavor that we want it to have, and not what these microorganisms that are present on the malt would convey to the beer. So we've pasteurized the wort, and we also reduce the wort, and in doing so, concentrate those flavors. So there's evaporation that takes place, and we basically create a syrup, a light syrup that's incorporated with hops. From there, after the hour and a half boil, we do what's called a knockout to whirlpool. So we transfer the beer. Anytime we're transferring the beer from one tank to the other, it's called knockout. And so we knock out to whirlpool. The whirlpool is a vessel here on the left-hand side of the brew house that has a tangential port in it that allows, when the wort comes into it, for the wort to kind of spin, and all the hops that we've added, all the proteins that have denatured in the boil, collect in the center of the whirlpool. So think about if you were ever trying to incorporate some cane sugar, some turbinado sugar into a glass of tea or something. It doesn't all immediately dissolve. And so when you're stirring it, some of it, if you let it go, will just kind of collect in the center. That's what's happening in this process. And that allows us to leave all that material behind and send clean wort onto the fermenter. So this is where we send, after it's gone through whirlpool, we now need to cool it down to fermentation temperature. And in doing so, I don't have a picture here of that, but I might as well speak a little bit about the spent grain. So this dumpster that you see here underneath the mash tun, we collect all the spent grain that we have, and then it goes into the dumpster. And then we have a larger dumpster that a farmer comes and collects and feeds to his cattle. So we're recycling all that, so to speak. This is a view from the brew house deck. So this is the mash tun. And you can see on the left-hand side a flow meter that tells us how much water is coming in, a temperature readout, and then mixing valves that allow us to mix the water. So basically, like, if you're at your bathroom sink and you want to make your water a certain temperature, you turn on the left and the hot and the cold to get it to that perfect temperature. This is the view of the kettle. The blue vessel on top was our old cold liquor tank. It is now part of our hot liquor system. If we have excess water that we want to pump from knockout, which I'll talk about in a second, we can pump it up to that top vessel. But that red vessel below it is, we had to have KU colors. That is our hot liquor tank. So all of our hot processed water comes from that tank. This is a view of inside the kettle. This is some pretty turbid looking wort that we were bringing in from a souring vessel. So this is guava. If any of you have had our beer Guavatas, which is a sour beer, that's the wort for it. So this went through this normal process of brewing, and then was sent to a vessel where lactic acid bacteria was introduced and allowed to sour the wort and bring it down to a certain pH. And then now in this process, we're bringing it back into the kettle to pasteurize it, so that lactic acid bacteria doesn't make its way to the rest of our brew house. And this is the cellar. So this is where the beer ferments. So we have a mishmash of various size fermenters and vessels. On the right-hand side, you see fermenter 8, and all the fermenters by law have to be named or numbered. And they have to have, their volumes stamped on the side as well. So this particular tank largely sees, beers that we can dry hop. On the very top, you can see a large opening that allows us to fill in hops from the top. And as I mentioned, hops added later in the process contribute more flavor and aroma. And dry hopping, the process of adding hops during fermentation or directly after fermentation, is where you get the most impact of flavor and aroma for hops. This is another part of the cellar. At the back there, you can see a panel with temp readouts. All of our tanks have RTD or thermocouple temp probes in the side of them. And so those temp probes will read out the temperature of the fermentation. The control units that are have the red numbers there, they're where we control the temperature of the fermentation. So if we are fermenting, say, the lager that we had earlier, which ferments at a cooler temperature, we would set the temperature upper limit to 54 degrees. It acts like a thermostat. So when the tank reaches above, the fermentation reaches above 54 degrees, there are jackets. These fermenters are double walled. So what you see on the outside is not the interior of the fermenter. In fact, there's insulation in between the exterior skin and the interior of the fermenter. And in certain zones, certain sections of that hollow space, there are areas where glycol, or basically an antifreeze, can travel through and cool the fermentation down. So when the fermentation gets too hot, a solenoid opens and floods that with cool 28-degree glycol that then cools the fermentation down to the correct temperature. And then when it's back to the correct temperature, it shuts off that flow of glycol.
Okay, we actually have a question about the fluid flow, and I would ask that just in the interest of time, maybe we get to the Yakamaniac too, but
Yeah, let's
Mark would
do it.
like to know, is there a control room operator? Is there a control room operator utilized to control the fluid flow, or is it the responsibility of the brewmaster?
It's the responsibility of the brewer, so
Okay,
of a particular shift, and we use pumps to send. So they're centrifugal pumps, so the liquid comes into the center of the pump, and then basically like a fan motor sends liquid out the other side of the pump, and that we use those pumps throughout the brew house to convey liquid.
okay. And can you brew more than one kind of beer at once?
Not at once, but
Not at once, not at this.
we do brew two different styles in a given day. So the first brew goes into one fermenter, the second brew goes into a second fermenter, and then the next day we'll come back and we'll brew the same style of beer into the first fermenter and the second fermenter again. So we have double batch fermenters throughout the cellar. And then we also have some single batch fermenters. So if we need to, and the reason that we do it in that staggered method is for yeast management's sake.
Okay.
Otherwise we would have to pitch a lot more yeast. So the last beer we're going to try is Yakamaniac IPA. And I've got the t-shirt on too. Yakima, Washington, like I said, is home to, and it's just an amazing place. It's kind of a cool place to visit for maybe a day, but it's home to the vast majority of the apple production in the States, the vast majority of the hop production in the States, and it is a very aromatic town when you're traveling through during harvest. Just smells amazing. It sits in anyway. So this is homage to that. When I first went to Yakima and I could smell the hops, I was like, I want to convey that in a beer. And so this beer is that love letter to Yakima, and it features Citra hops pretty predominantly, some Centennial hops, which have always been a favorite, and all those characters contribute to aromas and flavors of passion fruit and juicy fruit, a little bit of cannabis, citrus, orange, and it's our number one seller. So it's not available in grocery because it's a little bit above the ABV threshold for grocery here in the state of Kansas.
And what percent is that? What percent alcohol?
We're only allowed to sell beer up to 6% ABV in grocery in the state
And
of
what
Kansas.
is the Yaki?
Yakamaniac is at 7.3.
7.3. Okay. Well, and this is sort of the point of the program when we've had 3 beers presented, or wine, but this is our first beer program, for everybody to vote for their favorite. So if you feel like it and want to just put your favorite in the chat, we'll sort of monitor those and see what if Yakamaniac might be number 1. You never know. So or if you have any tasting notes, please go ahead and share as well, because anyway, sorry to rush you. I just wanted to get everything in. Jeff.
No. I'm glad you're the moderator. We need to have you. I can talk about this for a long time.
What's your output? Like, what's your daily, how much beer do you bottle every day at the bottling plant?
Oh, geez. So we bottle, generally speaking, 2 days a week, sometimes 3.
Okay.
We also can beer. So we're seeing an increase in the amount of canning that we're doing. We can't do those things at the same time. So for instance, this week we bottled it was kind of a slow bottling week. We only bottled today. Um, Typically we're bottling Tuesdays and Thursdays, but we did can two days this week as well. Today we bottled one of my favorite beers, but it's also very divisive. But it won a gold medal at the GABF in 2015, called Garden Party. That features an infusion of botanicals, local botanicals. So juniper berry, basil from Juniper Hill Farms, and cucumbers. So look for that in liquor stores. But our output it just varies depending on the season. And when we're brewing 40 barrels at a time.
Okay.
To give you perspective, there's 13 plus cases in a barrel of beer. So I don't know the math off the top of my head, but one batch, 13.77 times 40. We're doing 550 cases of beer in a given batch. So that's about 13,000 bottles of beer in a given batch. And then,
okay, I'm getting lots of questions now, so I want to make sure to get through. Are the cans you're using, are they lined so there's no metallic taste?
all cans are lined. Yes.
Okay.
There are no manufacturers that have unlined cans.
Okay, Kathleen says her quick tally shows that Yakamaniac did win by 1 vote, with Ad Astra coming in a close second. So there you go.
There you go.
How many barrels per month? Do you have that figure?
Close. I mean, we do close to 900 barrels a month.
Okay.
We last 2019, between the two facilities, we did close to 11,000 barrels of production. Obviously during COVID that was impacted, but mostly that was impacted with draft, and we saw an uptick in packaged beer, and we ended up brewing about 10,500 barrels. So, pretty close to our 2019 production.
And Mark has another question. What is your biggest challenge, the chemistry of the brew or the recipe itself?
The recipes come pretty naturally to me. And I've always been interested in both the art and the science of brewing. I definitely feel like I kind of veer more towards the art, but I certainly continue to educate myself all the time about the science aspect. We do have, I'm constantly reading technical journals, etc. But some of it is, quite frankly, over my head. I mean, I didn't go to school in biology, life sciences, any of that. So some of the actual science is a little dry and over my head. But we do quality control is of the utmost importance for us. We do everything that we can to minimize oxygen pickup in the beer, because that's detrimental, causes staling. We do testing throughout the process. We have basically a full-time lab technician that will plate every batch for microbes that could impact the flavor of the beer. And so, yeah, we're really invested in trying to make a consistent product. But the formulating recipes is really natural for me.
Annie wants to know, what makes it an IPA?
So IPA stands for India Pale Ale. It was a style that originated when during imperial times, where the Brits that were going to India wanted a beer that would last the voyage. And hops are a natural preservative in beer, so they upped the quantity of hops, and that reduced spoilage during that journey to India, hence the name. And so India Pale Ales are more highly hopped, and that has changed in character over time. You know, those original IPAs were probably just very bitter, but now there are new IPA styles emerging all the time. There's one called Cold IPA that just came into prominence. That's a combination of lager and IPA. There's the hazy IPAs that have been the rage for the last 5 years or so. Before that, it was West Coast style IPAs. And when I was in Seattle, you know, we had a very prominent Northwest style that featured resiny, piney type hops. So it's a kind of a regional, you know,
Okay.
differentiation.
Jay's got the question. I'm wondering, are there any new beers in testing on the horizon that you can talk about?
All the time. I mean, we've got a new beer coming out, a new Italian style Pilsner that is, it won't be in bottles. You know, I consider the original brew pub our R&D facility. So everything that we ever create comes out of here initially. And, you know, if it's a success out at the front at the bar, then it might make its way to package. Anyway, there's an Italian style Pils, which is a very dry style of Pilsner that gets dry hopped. And that is coming out next Friday. I came up with a name last night for it called Monza Circuit. The Monza Circuit is where they race the Italian Grand Prix in Formula One racing. So,
okay. My question though, is the Yakima climate the major factor in raising hops, or do other factors play a part for that area of the world?
it is the climate. It's the wonderful irrigation that comes off the Cascades. So it's an arid environment, but they have fantastic water sources. So there are diseases that can occur, particularly powdery mildew, that can occur on the hop plant if it were humid. And because it's not humid, it doesn't really do that. And they can irrigate from the bottom, and plus it gets an immense amount of sunshine, and these plants really thrive under sunshine. There are very few cloudy, rainy days in Yakima.
Okay. And our last question is, doesn't the double batch system allow more oxidation on the first day?
No, and actually, there is actually one time in the brewing process where oxygen is of utmost importance to introduce to the product, and that is right before fermentation. The yeast takes oxygen in and uses it to build cell wall strength, and the yeast propagates or multiplies through this system of budding, where it just basically buds off of itself. And so it needs a very strong, healthy cell wall to do that. And so we actually do oxygenate the wort on the way to the fermenter. And so that headspace that you're talking about is not a problem at all. And in fact, probably most of that oxygen gets displaced early in fermentation, because the yeast starts metabolizing all those sugars and then starts sending out CO2 into the atmosphere and out the top of the fermenter.
Okay. Well, we should probably wrap it up in the interest of time, although we have just seen two people come into the Zoom. I know you guys were thinking this started at 5. We are so sorry. We sent out a correction to the time.
Well, it got recorded, so that's
But
good.
it's recorded. It will live on YouTube probably by tomorrow. So you can watch it. And we apologize for that. It was simply a matter of having an activity all through COVID at 5 with our wine tasting, and we decided to do it at 4 for beer. So anyway, to the two guys that just came into the room, we do apologize. But Jeff, I can't. What?
For my former teacher out there, Paul Stewie, there will be a quiz.
I hope not. No, but that was really interesting, and we're so happy that you spent some time with us, especially coming from that unair-conditioned room that you're sitting in, and we appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. I never mentioned that this is the original brewery's mill room, so that's what I'm standing in right now.
Yeah, well, it's an impressive operation, and Lord knows Chuck really created something. He had a vision and he got it done, and it continues to grow. So kudos to everybody there at Free State Brewing Company, and thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes,
Very great
thank you.
presentation, Jeff.
Thank you. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
good job. Good job. So we'll do another one. We will let you know what we're doing, if we're going somewhere in person or if we'll be on Zoom, but it will be with another Lawrence brewery next month. And we hope to see you all there. And Kathleen, do you have anything else to add?
No, thanks so much for joining
Okay.
us.
All right.
Look forward to seeing you again.
All right, good. Cheers, everyone.